The Memory of Love, Chapter 42. The heavy air holds the last note of the clarinet as she crosses the patio. Adrian has half risen from his seat when she drops into the chair next to him, picks up the bottle of beer and raises it to her lips. Her dress is damp, her face and neck wet. He kisses her cheek, a taste of salt and sweet. She puts the bottle down and gasps, like a child. How was it? Could you hear properly? Absolutely, it was great. She nods and adds, except the daft note halfway through. It was fine, says Adrian. Who wouldn't know? It was so-so. People pass by the table. Mama Kay high-fives with one of the other band members, and the man slips into the seat next to her. They converse for a few moments about music, in language opaque to Adrian. During the course of the day, Adrian has thought of little else except his conversation with Elias Cole, until Mama Kay stepped out onto the stage and began to play. He takes a sip of his beer. Mama Kay has almost finished hers. He holds up a hand for 2 more. Elias Cole had been asking him to help. He didn't know. At least Adrian was fairly certain he didn't know about Adrian and Mama Kay. So, in that sense, it was not a direct request, and Adrian could yet ignore it. Nor is it in any way his professional responsibility. At the same time, it is not in his nature to shirk what ought to be done, for he was raised otherwise, and now it is embedded in his character. And there is Mama Kay. Elias Cole is her father. Elias Cole is dying. Adrian takes a swallow of beer. He watches the people in the club, the people still standing on the dance floor in the wake of the performance. A waiter in oversized shoes crossing the floor with a large tray of drinks. The bare-shouldered hookers at the bar. Mama Kay talking to her friend. He watches the way her hands and fingers fly and flutter, the same way she plays the clarinet. He remarked upon it once, and she told him it was a mark of poor technique. She is never detained by fantasy, only the escape provided by her music. Last night, when the moon was less full than it is now, he watched her sleeping. He watched the movement behind her eyelids and knew she was dreaming. He wanted to wake her up, just to ask her if she was dreaming of him. He loves her. Last night, he would have told her so. He would tell her now, but he mustn't. It is too difficult, too complicated. There is home. There is Lisa. There is Kate. Oh God, Kate. He mustn't think it. He looks away from Mama Kay towards the sea. Out into the blackness, behind the noise and music, comes the sound of the waves on the shore, like shattering crystals. And because he wants to talk about her, about the two of them, but most of all, about love, instead, Adrian talks to Mama Kay about her father. Walking down the darkened beach, behind them, the Ocean Club is slowly emptying of people. Adrian releases the conversation of earlier in the day. While he sat at the old man's bed, does so as accurately as he can, careful to choose the right words, not everything, just that which concerns her. When he is finished, they walk on. Silence, softly punctuated by the sound of their steps, the faint squeak of wet sand. He turns to see her profile traced in moonlight. He'd like to talk to you, I'm sure. Mama Kay does not reply. Adrian waits through her silence. No sound save the sound of the surf, the occasional sweep of a car on the beach road. Ahead of them, a sparse constellation of lights marks the peninsula. Presently, they reach a beach bar, closed and empty. There are cement tables set into the sand. She sits on one of them, tucking her legs under her. You do not understand about my father, she says. I don't know him as well as you, no. She shakes her head and looks past him to the sea. Try me, says Adrian. Tell me what I do not know. Okay, I'll tell you a story. I'll tell you a story about my mother and my father. Something that happened that made me begin to understand what was going on between them. I told you I always acted as the go-between, remember? We never did anything as a family, says Mama Kay. I remember. Well, once when I was 10 or maybe 11, my mother took me out for a treat. We went to the Red Rooster, a chicken restaurant in town. It was not anywhere near my birthday, and I remember I asked her why we were going. She told me it was because I was such a good daughter. I did not really believe her. A child can always tell when a parent is palming them off. Still, I didn't care. I was happy to have a treat. So we went to the Red Rooster, and we ordered chicken wings and soft drinks. My mother was in a good mood, making jokes. I liked it when she was like that. It didn't happen often. Around my father, she was much more reserved. Mama Kay stops, takes a breath and tilts her chin up at the sky. We'd been there half an hour or so when a friend of hers came in. It's a small city. It was even smaller then. Everybody knew everybody else. You've seen how it is. And yet I'd never met this man before. I didn't recognize him from my parents' circle of friends. The Red Rooster was in the center of town, and a lot of people from the offices around used to eat there. So I thought this man worked nearby. He was wearing a suit, I remember, but his hair was quite untidy and his beard untrimmed. He had a nice way about him. He spoke to me directly and treated me like a person instead of just a kid. My mother became very animated in his company. I remember I felt jealous because I had been enjoying his attention. They started to talk to each other and more or less forgot about me. I sulked for a bit and then it was time to go home. Mama Kay swings her feet down from the table and walks towards the sea. Adrian follows. In the car, on the way home, my mother told me not to mention we'd been to the Red Rooster to my father. She said he told her not to spend money on treats, so we should make it our secret. She shrugs. I said okay. I didn't really think about it again. Later, when I was older and all the girls started talking about boys, I wondered if my mother was having an affair with the man at the Red Rooster. In my head, I sort of settled on that as a suitable dramatic explanation. She laughs. But in time, I forgot about that as well. God, I feel like a cigarette. Do you have one? Adrian, who does not smoke, I didn't know she did, says no. Shall we buy some? Don't worry, let's go. On the walk back along the sand, Mama Kay removes her sandals and allows the water to run over her feet. Some years went by. I must have been about 15. I was rummaging around my mother's sewing box. I found an old newspaper cutting. I remember it because it had been cut with pinking shears and the edges of the paper were jagged. There was a photograph and a story. I recognized the picture. It was the man we had met at the Red Rooster that day. It said he had tried to blow up the bridge over to the peninsula. Adrian stopped walking. Jesus, exactly. Did you ask your mother about it? I did. He was an old friend from a long time ago, she said, claimed not to remember the day at the Red Rooster. She said she had not seen him in years, but I knew I hadn't misremembered. The next time I went into her sewing kit, I noticed the cutting wasn't there anymore. What was his name, the man? Do you remember? It was Conte, Kekura Conte. For a few moments, Adrian is quiet. They are approaching the Ocean Club again. He says, Kekura was an activist. Could your mother have been involved in something? Mama Kay laughs slightly. No, at least I don't imagine so. I'd guess the attack on the bridge was before we met him in the restaurant. Even though there was no date on the cutting, it looked really old. The paper had started to color and the ends roll over. Maybe they really were just friends. The point is that when we came home from the Red Rooster, she told me not to tell my father. I thought, or at least I fancied, it was because she thought my father would be jealous. But that wasn't the reason at all. What was it? She turns to Adrian. She wanted to keep it a secret because she didn't trust him. Don't you see? My mother didn't trust my father. They are back at the Ocean Club. Mama Kay sits at a table, her chin in her hand, fingers covering her mouth. The place is empty. The owner brings over 2 bottles of beer and waves at them to take their time. Adrian says, "Are you sure you are reading that right? As you say, children can place different interpretation on things. There could be another explanation." Okay, something else happened, she says. Years later, some months after my mother died, there had been protests on campus. The students were growing tired of the authorities. It was happening everywhere, but the campus was the center of it all. There were constant power cuts at one time. We were all trying to revise for exams. A group of students got a petition together to demand the Vice Chancellor's resignation. I signed the petition along with everybody else. I had an exam the day they marched to his office and handed it in. Otherwise, I would have been there. She's not looking at Adrian. Her gaze, unfocused, rests somewhere upon the table amid the beer mats and cigarette burns. After the exams, the students celebrated. There were parties on campus every night. It was the end of the academic year. All my friends were living in hall except me. I stayed at home to keep my father company that term. The last evening, my father called me and told me I was not to go up to the campus that night. He did not say why. Instead, he said a lot of things. I was out too much. I was out with the wrong crowd. There was talk about me. I was angry and shouted at him. There was talk about him too, I said, about him and a woman called Vanessa. Adrian glances at Mama Kay. She catches his look. Oh yes, I knew about Vanessa. I'd known for a long time. I went up to my room and stayed there. I told myself my father was being unreasonable. The strange thing was that, if anything, he had a tendency to spoil me. After a while, I went back downstairs and found him in his study. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting there behind his desk. I felt sorry for him. I thought perhaps he was thinking about my mother, as I was. I sat on the floor and put my head on his lap. He just laid his hand on my hair. Silence again. She does not lift her gaze from the table, but presses her fingers against her bottom lip. When she speaks, her voice is low with controlled emotion. That was the night security forces raided the campus. They attacked the students. A lot of people were hurt. They went through the halls of residence. 12 students were arrested. Most of them were the ones who had organized the petition. They were expelled and we never saw them again. All of them had been at the party I'd been invited to in one of the fraternity houses. They said it was the first place the police went. Afterwards, they forced their way into the dorms. By then, the students knew what was happening. Some of the male students tried to barricade the doors and to fight back. You can imagine what they did to them. There she stops, except for one last sentence. They were my friends. You dropped out after that? Yes, I dropped out. I was ashamed. She calls the owner and asks for a cigarette. He offers her one from his own pack. She takes it and lights it inexpertly, inhales 2 or 3 times. Neither of them speak. As she stabs the cigarette out, half smoked, she lifts her eyes to him. So you see, there are things about him you don't know.